It says a multi-sectoral approach would suffice in dealing with the rising cases of collapsed buildings. Let's take a look at a report that was prepared by Wairimu Njenga yesterday during some awards by the NCA, that's the National Construction Authority, before we delve into the discussion.
Over 87 buildings have collapsed, with over 200 people losing their lives. The collapse of buildings, especially within Nairobi and the satellite towns, has been blamed on poor workmanship and unqualified professionals in the construction industry. National Construction Authority blames property developers, rogue contractors and engineers for undertaking projects without following set out guidelines. NCA General Manager for Registration and Compliance, Susan Ruto, says out of the 26,000 structures inspected across the country, over 60% have been found unfit for habitation.
We do this Construction Excellence Award. It is a way of encouraging also more contractors so that they can also do more work, so that even the collapses can be reduced.
Ruto says the authority has issued several suspension orders to developers.
We have a unit of enforcement whereby once suspension orders are issued, our enforcement unit ensures that there are no any construction work being carried out.
The authority is, however, seeking a multi-sectoral approach in enforcing building regulations to curb the rising cases of collapsed buildings.
Previously, we were working in silos. You find that different agencies, they were working independently. But currently, we've realized that this is a concerted effort. It is a collective responsibility, and that is what we are doing.
The authority is exploring the use of drones and other technologies to monitor the sites.
And still on the same, a 2022 audit report by the National Construction Authority, that is NCA, on the collapse of buildings in Kenya places the blame squarely on poor workmanship, that is one, and non-compliance to standards. The report says that 10,791 out of 14,895 buildings were marked as unsafe for occupancy and needed either reinforcement or demolition. And we have seen the last 5 months, around 200 people have lost their lives due to collapsed building. I have in studio a construction and real estate expert who is also a project manager, Nashon Okowa. Karibu sana, Nashon.
Thank you very much.
And straight into the topic of discussion, looking at what NCA had lined up and the report that we've just had, it shows that even after years of trying to streamline the sector, we still have a lot of work, a lot of groundwork to cover.
We do, but I mean, if you look at that report, they lay blame everywhere except from themselves, which is unfortunate as well, because as an authority, the people of Kenya mandates them to supervise buildings. 47 million Kenyans cannot supervise buildings, and we delegated that authority to specific agencies to supervise buildings on their behalf, on our behalf, and to lay the blame on, yes, there is poor workmanship and all those other issues they've raised, but the first step needs to be at the authority, because when crimes goes up in the city, we blame the police first, who is supposed to curb crime. When buildings collapse, it's becoming a menace the way it is. We also must go first to the people that are responsible to supervise buildings. So yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but as you can see in the report, in my view, the problem of building collapse, we must start addressing it with the people that are supposed to supervise buildings on our behalf. Then the rest of the things fall into place, because, I mean, the law preempts there will be great developers. The law preempts there will be crime, there will be robbers, and it's put in place measures and authorities to curb those robbers. The law preempts that there will be someone who will want to cut shortcuts in construction and give mandates to the counties, the NEMAs, the NCS to ensure that person don't have the way. So when buildings are collapsing and you blame that person and not yourself, I think there's a problem there that they also need to capture, that there's a problem with authorities supposed to supervise buildings.
Well, and the damage itself, looking at the statistics by NCA, Kenya recorded 87 collapsed buildings over the past 5 years and over 200 lives lost. And we haven't even mentioned the people injured. Over 1,000 people have been maimed. And it begs the question, who is sleeping on the job? Because in as much as we continue trading accusations on either NCA, poor workmanship, poor materials, and even project managers like you have also been on the receiving end. The streamlining of the construction, the county government as well. Sometimes they say we did not give approvals for all this, and it has been a game of trading bulbs at each other.
And that's an unfortunate thing. Remember when Oruma building collapsed, and the head of state actually visited the site, the former president, and gave the authority that will do audit. And I've seen the report that's saying 60% of buildings are substandard. I've always asked myself, why don't they publish those buildings for Kenyans to know? Take 3 pages in a daily and list the buildings that have issues so that Kenyans move out. What are they waiting for? So buildings to collapse and then people die, and they keep reminding us they are 60% substandard buildings. The buck on building collapse must stop with the people. We mandated as a people to supervise. Any other attempt to do that is to create vigilantes to supervise construction. We can't do it. Not every village can do it. The people supervising constructions needs to take the mandate, and then we begin to discuss. Like, I know NCA is short in certain areas, they don't have prosecutor powers. That's a discussion we need to have. Let's discuss personnel for NCA. How many people do they have? All right, is it commensurate with the growth of construction sector, the buildings? Those are the problems we have, because they have less personnel to supervise. Same to the county. Do they need more funding? I think so. That's the debate we need to have. But it must be with the person we have given the powers in law to supervise the construction sector. Then the rest will follow.
And I remember more than 6 months ago, I had a discussion right here on television with one of the senior officials in the Kiambu County government in charge of planning and housing. And she said that one of the biggest challenge that they have is that sometimes you will find that the approvals are done well. The person is supposed to construct a 5-story building, but along the way, the person becomes greedy and decides it's going to be not going to be 5 floors, it's going to be 8 floors, which now compromises the foundation of the building, which they say, in as much as they try to audit these buildings, it's becoming a challenge as well.
You see, honestly, we are a country that is work in progress. We are a developing country. We have bad eggs amongst us. That's no question. Be it consultants, developer, contractors. We have to admit you have bad eggs amongst us. You see, when on that admission, and I'll tell you, the law requires that before a slab is cast, there's regular supervision of any building by the county inspectorates. Any building. In fact, before a slab is cast, they should inspect. So when someone adds additional floor, and I will get that excuse on NCA that probably cannot arrest, the county has powers to arrest you and take you to court. So when someone adds 2 additional floors, unnoticed, it shows some lacuna, that there's a gap in the way inspectors are doing the building. Either they're made to look away, or there is inadequate building inspectors. That is the debate we have to have. Do we need to reinforce counties, inspectorates, and all those things? That's what we need to have. But corruption is playing a big role here, and in the midst of the greed of developers and the ethics deficit in consultants, we are bound to have these shortcuts in the construction sector. But the regulator, the person who is supposed to enforce, must ensure these people don't have their way. That is what we require as a people. Otherwise, we are asking all of us to supervise buildings. We can't do it.
It's true, we cannot. And another challenge has been building owners have a tendency of engaging professionals right from the beginning, but along the way, or along maybe after 2-3 floors, everything else now they just rely on maybe their foreman or the quacks, as the NCA talks about, which also compromises the structural building.
It does. And you see, I personally called for, we need to criminalize the sale of professional licenses, because what happens is this. When you want to build, you will get the diploma guy, the unqualified quack to do the designs, then you'll come to Nashon, because the law requires you to have a licensed architect to get approvals. You'll pay Nashon 5,000 to get his license, then go approve and then proceed with the quack. So those are things we need to do. We need to criminalize some of these acts. Like, you cannot sell your license to a crook developer to go build with your license, and then you don't supervise. Those are the things we need to do, because consultants also have to blame here. And here I will blame the regulators of consultants, Engineers Board of Kenya, Board of Registration of Architects and Quantity Surveyors. We need to see more action from them. That when a building has gone down, who license was used to approve? Because usually some of them have approvals. Did they supervise? Usually, if you go in town, it's a big business. There are consultants who simply set their licenses at a small fee and they stamp drawings for you, you go and get approval. That is what we need to deal with at first and make it a criminal offense, because you're killing innocent Kenyans with your sale of licenses. That's how they get emboldened to use quacks, and yet behind them there's a name on the board of person who never went to site 1 year down the line.
Wow. And still on the same, we have seen some of on the approvals. We have seen some buildings which, even if you're not a project manager like Nashon, and even if you are not an engineer, you will see very well that that building is not constructed the place that it should be. Perhaps you find buildings in riparian run. We've seen some buildings in swampy areas, soft soil, and you wonder, how did these people get their approvals?
You see, and that's why it's always very convenient when a building collapses in the year the county says we didn't approve. I mean, unlike crime, a police seated in Central will not know that that's a thief in the middle of Koinange. But buildings come up in glare, in sunlight. Yeah, when quite a building collapsed 7 stories and the county says, no, we didn't approve. Where have you been? I mean, everyone saw the building coming up. So is it lack of your personnel in that area or corruption? Because that's a big issue. Approvals in this town are issued, I always say, on 2 grounds, based on the size of your pocket and sometimes how people wake up. I mean, it's that subjective approval process, and that is a problem. And that's why building comes up in riparian, and those riparian, they are inspectorates. If you go there, you'll find them going all the time. So corruption is playing a key role in this approval menace we're dealing with.
And still on corruption, we have seen some I don't know whether it's the foreman or the coordinators or the project manager in such a project. You will find a project will start very well, but unfortunately they will not follow what exactly is outlined in the approval that they were given, which becomes a little bit hard to track that building down. A practical example, if my house is supposed to go 5 floors and I add another cheeky one or 2, it will be very hard to know exactly what I did, but when that building comes down is when everything now will be discussed. Yeah, we had talked about 5 floors, now you talked about 6 or 7 floors, and then now the law will start turning. It's very hard to track this cheeky businessmen.
It is, you see, let me give a perspective of how that is coming up. Real estate was known to be the booming investment area. And still, the perception of many Kenyans have not changed. They still think it is the era of the boom. It's changed. It's not the era of the supernormal profits. Profits have normalized. However, people do not want to accept that. So this is what happens. And then a lot of developers don't do feasibilities. And the carelessness in management of projects bring in variations. And coupled with that, there are a lot of greed in real estate. It's almost blasphemous greed for some people. So when you begin to construct, costs begin to hit you, variations begin to hit you in terms of variations cost, you're going to make a loss. So you are tempted to say, okay, let me go additional 2 floors so that I can make money. That's how it comes to place. The foundation is you came here to make a lot of money. It's not there anymore, and people must accept that. This is not the industry of 2008, 2010. It's changed. Profits are normalized. Yes, it's still I would say the greatest investment area still, but it's not the boom era. People come with that mentality, and then poorly managed projects with the quacks, they get hit in projects in terms of variations. The thought that will come to rationally to anyone is let's go additional floors. Now, when you go additional floors, they're emboldened by corruption because they know I'll just pay off the inspector that comes until 2 years end and I get my project. And unless the building collapses, you will not know. And I've always said this, you have a lot of illegal buildings in this town. A lot of illegal buildings. If you don't regularize these buildings at some point, one day we'll get a developer and we'll demolish a lot of buildings. And that's the truth, because building plans do not marry with what is built on the ground. And a lot of projects are like that. And until it collapses, you will not know.
And Nashon, I've seen, I don't know whether it's NCA or who does that, who marks the building that this building is unsafe. But you will find still people living in that building, there are authorities. We can see it has been painted red, meaning that it shouldn't be there. It should be brought down or it should be reinforced, just like NCA said. But you will find people are living there. And we have authorities. Even we have an area chief and assistant chief. We have the area sub-area. We have a lot of authority or a lot of offices that can actually move in with speed to quell that. Because as long as a building is marked, is not fit for people to live in, it should be brought down.
I agree. And you see, that's why, personally, I think we need to begin by amending the NCA Act. You see, NCA has no prosecutor powers. They don't have it. I think at some point there was a discussion to have a department at the DPP. It didn't work out. I think now they're partnered with the interior government, police to arrest. It's chaos. We created a big watchdog for the construction sector and didn't give that dog the teeth to bite. All they can do is mark. And outside marking, if you're continuing the building, there's nothing they can do. NCA is not like NEMA and county. Those guys will arrest you and have those processes of prosecution. They don't have it. And we must amend that act, that I was saying, so that that red mark, themselves, because that red mark means a lot of things, can now begin to arrest and take you to court. And until we have those gaps, whatever you're saying will be a problem for us. And those are the areas we must reinforce as early as this year, that the NCA Act of 2016, we must amend it properly and give them teeth. So that if they don't arrest now, and people are well educated, because now the unfortunate thing as well is, you see that mark, and I've always discussed this with the officials of NCA, if they mark the building and then I for example, comply, they have no white mark to come and erase it. So sometimes those buildings that are marked as well, partly have complied. No one has no idea. But let's begin to give them the power so that they know we can arrest, not necessarily relying on interior government or DPP to prosecute. Then the issue of the red mark will be squarely light on NCA. We can't leave it to local administrators. Those are the things we must embolden.
It's true. And Nashon, I'm quite sure you're also disturbed when you see buildings collapse in the country and lives lost, and not to mention how many millions go down. We haven't even mentioned the people who are maimed or who are injured or killed. Matters insurance. I have been to a WhatsApp group where we were contributing some money because unfortunately we had some people from home who a building collapsed. There's no insurance. They didn't have medical insurance. Now we had to cater for that. We haven't had a case where a building collapses, the owner is arrested because maybe he did not follow the approvals that were laid down, and we haven't had anything on ensuring of the people who lose their lives or who are maimed by the collapsed building.
Yes, which is very unfortunate. That hasn't happened, and the second thing that hasn't happened is we've never seen a developer prosecuted to the end in all these menace. But look, partly I believe we need to have, like, if you go to the UK, I think the UK and India has it, it's what you call the structural warranties of buildings and structural insurance of buildings. It's a 10-year period. And those are the things, those are discussions we must have now as a people, that we must insure buildings structurally with insurance, so that if something happens, the insurance also will bring another layer on inspectorate, because for them to insure your building, they will ensure the procedure was followed. Just another layer we bring. And then in case of eventualities, those kind of things happen. However, during construction period, there's insurance. There's what we call the contractor all risk insurance. Now, if the site was being run by professionally, by a registered contractor and professionals, usually you'll have the contractor all risk insurance, and then the WIBA, Workers' Injuries Benefit Act insurance. That also is then, it's a low requirement for any site to have that. However, that will be effective if the site was being run professionally. If that guy was a quack developer or a grid developer, you realize all down through, those things will not be there. But there is a requirement that a site have what you call contractor all risk and the WIBA for the injuries for all the workers on site. Yes.
That is why sometimes, because of the person contravened the law, that is why you find that people are not insured.
Absolutely. If you begin with shortcuts, if you begin to get a quack architect, definitely you'll have a quack contractor. Because and I say this all the time, registered contractors will give you some bulletproof as a developer, because they will not allow certain things to happen. They will ensure there is performance bond, there is the all risks, there is the workers' injury, the contractor is qualified, and then you secure your investment. But if that guy on the top begins with grid, trust me, all the way down, including the buyers, will be hurt here, because that's how you end up with these projects that don't even exist.
And I don't know whether matters building and constructions is a devolved function, but looking at county governments, every time we hear a collapsed building, the first place we go is the NCA, the National Construction Authority. But the county governments also have ministries which look into matters, housing, real estate, buildings, but we don't see them quite vigilant in terms of ensuring that those buildings which have been earmarked for demolition or for reinforcement, that is done. I think this is a place that we need to exploit, because we are always looking at the national government, and some of the devolved functions, maybe we can chip in so that we may save lives.
I totally agree. Actually, if you check those authorities, I think NCA is the bottom. Even in the approvals, they come at the bottom. The biggest responsibility for building supervision lies with the county government. They are the people that approve drawings. NCA does not approve drawings. NCA register projects and then register contractors. The people that approve developments and are supposed to check that the structural drawings conforms, the drawing is okay, the steel in the columns are okay, are the counties. All right? And that's why we have also have this debate. We need to decide who we want to give this mandate, because that's why this back always continues. Building collapse, county, NCA, county, NCA. Who is supposed to do it? Right now, as we speak, the biggest responsibility of buildings lies with county governments. They approve every single drawing. The guy that approves the drawings is the guy that is mandated to the lives of Kenyans, not the guy that simply registers projects. That's not the guy. And they have gotten away with it so much, and NCA has taken the hit, which is unfortunate. So those are the things we need to streamline in this sector. If we don't streamline these things, buildings are going to collapse.
And Nashon, it's a good thing that you mentioned about the NCA Act, which in your view as a project manager, you would like to see it amended so that it may incorporate a lot of things, including the teeth, just like you say. And looking at the law and how it is now, and we don't hear any amendment on the way, that coupled with corruption, you will bear me witness, there are some county officials who are quite corrupt. And NCA did mention that these people who are compromised already, they have already compromised the building. Whether the building will collapse or not, they have already compromised the building because they have already been compromised. And now it's a wait-and-see game on whether this building is going to collapse or not. I would like you to touch on that, because we have a lot of corruption in the country and even in the building sector.
Absolutely. It's corruption and then coupled with our, what I will call, ethics deficit. Corruption in county government is really entrenched, all right? If you go for approvals in Nairobi County, you'll be so surprised at the amount of money you are expected to pay. And that's why even some of us were telling the governor, remove the entire technical committee, bring new people. By the time they land, probably will be next election. Again, do like that, because it's a circle of people that are so entrenched. There is no much thought in supervising buildings. Actually, let me shock you. Ask how many architects are in the county to check drawings, or engineers, proper registered engineers. You'll be surprised how many there are. I think there's only one in Nairobi County. All right, I stand corrected. Now, how many buildings are going up in Nairobi County? A lot. So who is checking these buildings? So corruption is our biggest enemy here. And in my view, it's what is driving a lot of illegal and planned buildings, for example, in Nairobi. Buildings all over without any single plan. We are destroying an entire city because of unplanned buildings. Now, if we don't address that, and that's why on buildings collapse, NCA for me is at the bottom. Yeah, of course, they don't escape the shackles of corruption as well in the officials, but the biggest mandate is on the county, including supervising, approving, and all those things. We're in a big mess.
Do you believe that you have to go for the approvals before you start the building? And then you're given all the approvals, you construct your building, and then if it's a commercial building, you let tenants in. Do you believe maybe after the building is constructed, it should be inspected before it is commercialized? This is why I'm saying this.
Yes.
Okay. I'm saying this because if at all my building was supposed to be 5 floors and I've constructed 6 or 7 floors, 2 of which are illegal, then when the building is being inspected before I commercialize it, then these are some of the things, some of the loopholes that can be seen. And if at all there is a law that I contravene, that is the best place to point it out.
100%. I mean, the County Government Act is very clear. You get approval. Actually, by the time you're paying for approvals, all right, you're paying for occupation license. The law requires that once you finish the building, and the architect has issued what we call the architect certificate of practical completion, that signifies the project is complete. The architect, that document, the engineer write indemnity letters to the county and tells them we've supervised the building. The county is required to come and inspect the building and then give the developer what we call the occupation certificate, meaning the building certifies the intention for the public. That's why I said this mandate is with the people we've authorized, because they're supposed to check that building. You and I can occupy it safely. Now, what happens? They don't even go to site. It's a question of my building is complete, apply, I pay something, and I get an occupation certificate. But the law is, I mean, the law is there on that. That comes supervise, inspect, and then give me occupation license. Do they inspect? They don't.
And there's also something that came up in that report by NCA. Some blame has been put squarely on poor materials and poor workmanship. You will find that after we've gotten all the approvals, but when it comes to the sourcing of the mafundis and the korogas, as they are called, you find that a lot of people would want a lot of cheap labor. And when we have poor workmanship, you don't expect, despite the approvals, you don't expect that building to stand, or maybe it's going to develop. We've seen cracks, we've seen some of the buildings lean, we've seen some of the buildings even collapse as well.
Look, in my view, that is again the bottom of my list of reasons of why buildings are collapsing. It is a problem, but it's not the major problem. Because if you understand how a project works, the rigorous process of doing a project, the rigorous process of doing a structure, if you have a registered engineer, all materials are tested before they're used. He approves every single thing, plus the source. You cast a slab, we do what we call cube test, to test the slab, the strength of that slab at that point. All right? It cannot collapse. If you are a proper registered consultant, a building cannot collapse, even with the issue of substandard materials. I mean, I've been on projects for 12 years where we've retired so many sand and ballast from our sites because they're substandard. We've retired steel from our sites because they're substandard. So if you are professionals who understand construction, those substandard materials will not slip into site. If they will slip into site, you begin to have a problem. The problem we have here is you have people who are running projects who are not supposed to run those projects. That is the quirk issue. But the rigorous process of doing a structure only, I mean, it will be really unlikely for buildings collapse under a registered engineer.
And according to the World Bank, I see Kenya has a housing deficit of at least 2 million houses, which increases by around 200,000 units per year. And I think that is why housing was one of the big four agenda. And we have seen the president now talk about a lot of housing projects and say that the kazi mtaani, or those who are working in the kazi mtaani, will be transferred to the construction of the affordable housing units in the country, just to underscore the housing deficit that we have in the country. I think that is why perhaps we are seeing a lot of quirks, because the industry is quite robust. How is it post-COVID?
No, I think we've begun on a good note now. I mean, the year after election is always fantastic for us in the construction sector. We suffer towards the election a lot. We almost come to a grind. 1 year after elections, the industry is picking up well. Though I have seen that the steel prices have gone up globally by 30% again. So we expect that to hit us, I think, by February, March. You're going to have another real problem on steel prices again. But generally, it's looking good. We have, I mean, only 16% of Kenyans own houses. Only 16%.
16%?
Yeah, only 60% of Kenyans own houses. So there is a big gap. There's a big gap. And for a second administration running, we've got the government's attention on housing, which is a good thing. Now, whether they will succeed or not, we want them to succeed. Personally, I do. But they have to get some certain things right from the previous administration, what they got wrong, because that was a total failure. They must correct those mistakes. The cost of construction is still a major problem in this country. That is our elephant in the room. Construction costs and land. If you deal with those two items, you deal with the affordable housing. And also, I mean, we also need to discuss whether do we need ownership or not. I don't think we need ownership in this country. We need housing. If you check at Article 43(1)(b) of the Constitution, it's the right to housing. It's not a right to ownership. Ownership is ownership is at the bottom list of most Kenyans.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Ownership is at the bottom list of most Kenyans. Most Kenyans want decent housing. They live on $1 a day, all right? So they want housing. Probably, I mean, I've discussed this with my peers and some government colleagues, and I keep telling them, go the Nordic way, give long-term rents. We do not need everyone to own houses. Long-term rent of 30 years can work for some people, so that they put meals on their table. So I think it is a right to housing or ownership. We are debating that with them, so that we don't have spectacular failure like the previous administration. But it's a good thing for the government to have agenda on housing. I think it's fantastic.
Again, I will say it's an interesting way of how you're seeing it, because that's a very interesting way, because I've lived in the same house for the last 11 years. And we're talking about long-term leasing. I think that will be affordable for a lot of Kenyans, as opposed to trying mortgage ownership or even buying.
It will. And if you ask me, developing countries must deal with housing deficit in terms of housing and not ownership. We conflate housing and ownership a lot. The right to housing in Article 43(1)(b) is a housing right, not an ownership right. People that live in the slums want decent housing. It's not a must that they own those houses, all right? Owning them is the least of their intentions. They want better schools and all those other things. So we must remove our government fixation with housing, like you pay to own. No, you can also pay to rent. And the Nordic countries of Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, Norway are a fantastic model of long-term rents that are working for those countries, and they've addressed our housing deficit, so that we don't have to bog people down with, we need to own houses. And it's gone down to the middle class. Everyone wants to own a house. And sometimes it's not even prudent to own a house. I mean, you have 8 million, you could invest it somewhere and continue renting your house. That's a discussion we must have as a people. And if you're going to achieve that deficit, I think ownership will be the bottom of that list. We need housing, not ownership.
Nashon, I would like to shift focus a bit, because when you talk about housing, and especially these commercial buildings here in big towns, and especially in Nairobi, we have seen a lot of billboards, and they are quite strong and quite huge. When they collapse, it's more or less like another building collapsing, because we have seen some billboards come tumbling down. And this is something, I think it's a gray area. I don't know anything about how the approvals that are given for billboards and where you should put a billboard in a building. You find a building that is quite high, and you see the billboard quite high. And unfortunately, if anything happens to that because of either the billboard was not well reinforced, we have seen them coming down. We haven't had any incident yet of taking life, but it's also a concern. There are so many billboards in big towns.
I mean, yes, I've seen them as well. I know majority, like in cities, lie with the counties. And again, greed is taking a great effect. I mean, we're putting billboards literally everywhere. In residential houses, you see on the back of residential houses, there are billboards. Literally, there's a fight for billboard spaces. And if you have to organize the city, I know the ones on the highways are with either Kena or Kura, because they have to be done on the road reserves and all those stuff. What I know for sure, I don't think there is thought on design and the structural billboards that are done. We've left them for commercial spaces and the people that are supposed to erect them to decide how they are erected. And as you say, it's a time bomb. It's a powdered cake we have in our hands. And you know, we are always reactive. When one will come down, and then we'll say, okay, now let's look at all the billboards. But it's a concern that some of us in the construction sector, and also how they're built, you know, how they're built. If you check out Safaricom and Airtel build their towers, they're professional engineers behind them. I stand corrected, but I don't think there's much engineering behind some of these billboards being erected.
Indeed, and because I'm talking from a point of experience, because one billboard is about 10 meters by 12 meters. So we're talking about an average-sized man, 10, and then another 12. So you can imagine, it might seem a little, or might seem quite small while it's in the building, but it's a very huge and very huge metals that are used. So in case of anything and it comes tumbling down, then we have issues. Unfortunately, as you said, it's also another gray area.
It is.
The counties, because now we have the devolved units. What are some of the responsibilities that they should take in matters construction and buildings?
In my view, I think the counties have the perfect laws. I do not see an amendment required to the regulations that county have. And in case counties, I mean, it's so easy for them they can go through the assembly and quickly bring regulations. But if you look at Nairobi County, for example, I mean, they have just perfect laws. Zonings that they're not following. If only we just stuck to what the law says, that a building bedroom window needs to be 2.4 meters away from the boundary. That's what the code says, all right? So that there's a breathing space, and the lounge one needs to be, I think, 3 meters away from the boundary line. You give people decency to live, because the right to a good city is a human right. This is a human right for us, for people like us. Let's just follow the law. If we follow the law and approve buildings as per the law, we'll have a great city. And now sometimes when you say this, people think like we don't want the skyscrapers. We want the skyscrapers. But the path to uncoordinated, uncontrolled buildings is not the path to a great city. The great cities before us have planned that path. We are not planning it. I mean, look at what is happening in the Kileleshwas and the Kilimanis. Those are legally, as I speak to you, those zones are zone 3 and 4 and Westlands. That is 3-4 stories. That is what the law says as we speak. It's not been changed up to date. We must regularize that law so that we know Kileleshwa is 15 floors or 18 floors. When my neighbor is building, I know he'll go 18. So that when I build, I plan with that in mind. But right now, even if I go 12 floors, my neighbor can do 20. There's no guidance to how that is done. And that's why I wrote about it somewhere. We are seeing the rise of vigilante residence associations. It's going to be a big fight. And as I said, the courts must prepare a special court. If we go in this direction of buildings coming up, and residents are going to arm themselves with serious court cases. You've seen it in Karen. A lot of petrol stations are being fought here and there. Kilimani has a big fight with developers. It should not happen. This mandate should be with the county. If county follows the law and then consult developers and them as us, that mandate as well, we'll not have these issues. But as it's still, a lot of buildings will be challenged. A lot of buildings are going to be fought with residents, because residents are beginning to take that mandate of supervising their neighborhoods. Let's just follow the law in counties.
All right, and I'll pick it from where you've left it, matters courts. We've seen a lot of buildings. We're talking about 87 buildings in the last 5 years, and 200 people dead, over 1,000 injured. But we haven't had 10 building owners serving a 10-year term or a 20-year term because they didn't follow the procedure that was supposed or was laid down, and people lost their lives. We are not hearing this. We are only adding dead bodies, but we are not adding people in the jail.
And I don't think we're about to hear that for some time.
Why is that?
There's so many gaps. As I said, there's so many gaps in how these buildings are approved. First of all, you find a building was approved. There's a mandate of the county to supervise. They also didn't do their work in that process. Coupled with corruption. Yeah, I think we're still a country where you are innocent until proven rich, in my view. All right? So, in my view, we still work with, and you're innocent until proven rich.
Yeah.
With that, cases drag 10 years and 20 years and all those things. And as I said, since in my practice, and this is my 13th years in this field, I've seen so many buildings collapse and no developer prosecuted. And I don't think it will happen because the people who are supposed to take this initiative, NCA has no prosecutor power, so you're leaving it to NEMA and what county, the people
and
that
DPP.
and DPP, and the people who are supposed to supervise as well. So they also fail in their duty to supervise. How will they prosecute you? So we must have a total dynamic shift and change of mentality if you're going to stop building collapse. Otherwise, it will collapse.
I totally concur, because I also report from the courts, and for the last 5 years, we've not had any conviction. Yes, a lot of people have been brought because of contravening the laws that are laid down, but we've never had a conviction in the last 5 years, at least from my own view and reporting from the court for the last 5 years. But we are hoping, at least, as you said, the NCA Act, if it is amended, it will incorporate all these and also some stringent laws. Do you believe we need to tighten some laws?
We need to. Another law we need to introduce is on developers. You know, this real estate sector is regulated for everyone except the person that pays everyone. There's no law that regulates developers. I mean, you can walk out tomorrow from here and be a developer. All right? And that brings the issue of off-plan sales and how people are conned, because there is no law that regulates developers. We must regulate developers in this country. We must amend the NC Act and give them more teeth to bite. So when a building collapses, there is no excuse of we can't prosecute. You have the powers with you to prosecute and supervise. I also say I think we need to return NC levy at the risk of going against my colleagues. Just like for NEMA we've returned. Those bodies are underfunded. When we remove the NCA and NEMA levy, at least NEMA has got the levy back. Let's give NCA levy back. It's not achieved what we intended it to achieve when we removed it. Give them money back. They can hire enough personnel as possible. So when a building collapses, they don't have any excuse. We want more than a press statement from these authorities.
And it's a good thing that you brought about that, because I wanted to ask the next question. How do we increase capacity for all those mandated to look into the construction industry in the country, including NEMA, including NCA? Just like you said, as we began this discussion, is that NCA, yes, is that big black dog, but it has no teeth to bite.
It doesn't. And you see, it has no prosecutorial powers, and it has no proper funding. In 2017, I think just after elections, the administration removed NEMA and levy fees of NCA and NEMA. And I personally had an issue with it. And because they're saying, oh, we want to lower the cost of housing. Those fees are the least significant in doing a feasibility on a house, in terms of affecting the price. And what they did, we now started funding it from the exchequer. I mean, we all know how we are suffering as a country in terms of our brokenness. So those bodies that are funded. So NCA, that is supposed now to supervise, have been doing a lot of trainings, in my view, because they want revenue. Training contractors, they are always in training. Give NCA the money, and that money, give it from the people that are building. Same as NEMA. I mean, if you look at the polluter pay principle, he who pollutes should pay. That's why that levy should be paid by developers. Why should the exchequer pay that money on behalf of developers? Give them the levy. Let's give them the prosecutor powers. When the next building collapses, let's see what that press statement says. Because right now, they have a lot of excuses that they will give us. And as long as they give us excuses like that, buildings are going to collapse. For the counties have the money. The counties just need to get rid of corruption. Counties have enough resources, and they just need to hire personnel and supervise our buildings. I don't think there's anything else required in the county apart from leadership.
And let's look at urban planning, because you might have very good buildings, but the way they are planned, you'll find that you'll have a lot of challenges in terms of motion, in terms of drainage systems, in terms of sewerage systems. But we are seeing sometimes in some estate, you look at an estate and you wonder, who did the urban planning? Because let's give a practical example. When there is a fire somewhere, you find that it becomes so hard for fire engines to make their way to where the fire is. And it's more or less because of how it was planned. And if you look at the approvals of these guys who built those buildings, you will find that they had all ticks. They ticked all the boxes in terms of the approvals before they started the building.
I mean, urban planners have failed us in this country. And to say failure is, honestly, it's an understatement. It's more than that. I mean, I think 2 weeks ago we were discussing about the Eastlands and how we are disenfranchising the children in terms of ricket disease. Buildings can't access sunlight, and we are in the tropics. It's a problem, and a whole generation is in problems. Children who stay indoors January to January because there's no place, and they can't access sunlight. It's a big issue down there, all right? But you see, Nairobi has grown exponentially. In 2000, we were 2.1 million people. Last census, we were 4.2. We have almost doubled. But our sewer systems, our stormwater drainage, our roads have not grown commensurate to that growth. Remember, we have one of the highest urbanization rates at 4.4%. One of the highest population growth rate, all right? So the statistics say we receive almost 500,000 people in urban centers yearly, and it's not just unique to us. The continent of Africa receives around 40,000 people daily to cities. It's a problem we are going to face. We must expand ourselves. We must coordinate properly, and our planning is at the threshold of that planning. Now, we have a big problem in terms of planning. We are blocking our riparian reserves, we are blocking our road reserves, we are blocking our power lines, we are blocking everything. at the cheer of those who are supposed to approve and inspect.
Yes, you've seen even when somebody wants to shift that you have to tie your things with ropes because nobody can be able to access the building itself. And that building passed all the approvals that was supposed to.
Absolutely.
And it's an urban. It's an urban setting.
And that's why I say the absence, the gap is not the law. I mean, I've seen people pulling sofa sets to their rooms.
Yes.
It's a common phenomenon in other parts of this city. And yet, there's a code of how big that staircase needs to be. It's there. How big the door needs to be. Standard door is there. It's science thought through. Who is supposed to implement that? It is the authority. You and I cannot go around supervising buildings. We'll be strangers. But the authority can go and check that every single building conforms to what the code says. And that's why I say this mess we see around, we must lay it squarely to people that we have mandated and are paying through our taxes to supervise.
Yes, and let's now shift gears because of the interest of time to real estate. There's something I was able to pick from what you're saying, that each and every election cycle you quite suffer some losses in terms of how the politics of Kenya polarize the economy. So how is the sector now? Because a lot of people will ask, do I build, do I mortgage, or do I buy a totally constructed buildings? Because if I have to buy a commercial building, and I will look at all the approvals and I'll look at the building itself, then I will be able to evade a lot of questions later on in terms of how the building has been constructed.
Look, honestly, the debate of whether to build or buy is a large debate. I've been asked so many times that question. There is no clear-cut answer. There are a number of considerations you need to put in place to decide whether you need to buy. The bottom line of those two is vigilance. Whether you're going to build or you're going to buy, on a developing country, you're going to be extremely vigilant as a person. If you don't have time, if you're the busy type, forget about building. You'll build 2 houses for the foreman and yourself. Buy a house. But you have to be extremely vigilant. There's a process of how you need to check that the building conforms before you pay. The real estate sector is moving to satellite towns. All right? I know there are some pseudo analysts that have been talking about the bubble. There's no bubble coming. As I say, it's only 60% of us own houses. It's a big gap. The top of this pyramid is full. The high-end housing is getting saturated. And those who have been saying bubble have been looking at the high-end. The fact that the high-end market is full doesn't mean that there's no market. It's a big market. It's moving to satellite towns. That's where real estate is moving. Any wise investor in real estate must start thinking of the satellite towns of Nairobi. That's where it's moving. And that we are beginning to sort out the housing for the middle class, what we call the middle end and the low end. That's where it's moving to. Still the most attractive in my view. Higher returns more than TBs, whatever it is you're looking at. But it requires ruthless vigilance from a developer and the buyer. Yes.
And it's a good thing that you've been able to observe that, because we're looking at Kitengela, we're looking at Juja, Ruiru, Machakos. We see that a lot of buildings are coming up. More or less people are now concentrating on satellite towns, as you have rightly put it. Now, because the building industry here in the country, looking at the Big Four agenda, it didn't quite, if we look at it keenly, is that it didn't achieve what it was supposed to do. And still building on that is the president, the current president, William Ruto, is still more or less like building on the small gains that the Big Four, one of the Big Four agenda, housing, has been able to get. Because he talked about more youths to be employed as we go on to launch new projects, as we go on to construct new buildings so that Kenyans can own their own houses.
Yes, I mean...
Are we moving somewhere? Have we done anything? Because the Big Four agenda did not, the housing, we've made... the housing pillar.
We've made meaningful progress, and I was a big critic of the Jubilee administration housing agenda. I was a big critic from day one because its premise was wrong, in my view. All right? I don't even want to come to the debate of whether government needs to build houses or not. That's a whole debate with different views. But 500,000 housing per year 500,000 housing, so they targeted in 5 years. President Ruto has targeted 250 annually. Actually, it's targeted to meet because our housing demand annually is 250. I think it's more than 250 because we've thrown 250 for the last decade. It's more than 250. So our demand is 250. Then we supply 50,000. So we have a deficit of 200. He wants to do 250. In my view, the premise of how he started it is almost the same as what Uhuru started it. It's a wrong premise, in my view. The debate on affordable housing must begin with addressing the cost of construction, which we've not. I mean, this month alone, we've tripled the capital gain tax for real estate and construction, from 5% to 15%. How are we going to lower these prices? So, you see, it doesn't matter whether you employ the Juakali person to do the doors. The cost of steel is the same.
Yeah.
If that steel price is high, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who does the koroga. If the cement price is high, it's high. So if you do your feasibility on that premise of high cost, you'll always end up with a higher price that common man cannot buy a house.
Okay.
Number two, I think we must remove what I call the financialization of housing. We must treat that housing as a right and not an area of investment. Make it almost a non-profit.
Indeed, and thank you so much for your insight. I have been speaking to Okowa Nashon, who is a project manager. We are trying to put things into perspective when it comes to buildings, and especially in urban centers. We have witnessed a lot of people die. In the last 5 years, we have over 200 people who have been killed when buildings collapsed, and we have over 1,000 who have been injured. We're trying to put a few things here and there to see how we can be able to help that industry. The counties, as well as Nashon has rightly put it, is that they have a responsibility as well. And also you, as a Mwananchi, you have responsibility as well. We've seen buildings that have been marked for demolition and people are still living in those houses. Well, now we are going to be looking at the state of politics in the country. And yesterday we were treated to some statistics which have made a lot of Kenyans smile and also wonder exactly how did the National Bureau of Statistics also come up with that. We have seen the demographic survey that was released yesterday, and also the politics of the day that will be coming up in the next 5 minutes or so. I will be engaging advocate of the High Court and a governance expert, Gibson Nyamato Gisore, and I'll also be having a governance expert, Alenga Tolsten, in the next hour. So don't worry.